When Karen from the HOA started swiping my packages, I knew I had to fight back, with a little help from a smelly, furry friend. What began as a simple act of petty revenge quickly escalated into a full-blown neighborhood war, and let's just say the skunk was the least of her worries. It all started innocently enough. I had ordered a pair of sneakers online, something I'd been saving up for weeks to buy. The tracking number said they'd been delivered, but when I checked my porch, there was nothing there. I figured it was a mistake. Maybe the delivery driver got the wrong house or marked it as delivered prematurely. I gave it a day, thinking it might show up, but it didn't. I contacted the seller, and they were kind enough to send a replacement. I thought that was the end of it. But then it happened again. This time, it was a book I'd been waiting to read. The tracking said delivered, but once again, my porch was empty. I started to get suspicious. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone knows each other, or at least pretends to. The kind of place where people wave as they drive by and make small talk about the weather. Package theft wasn't something that happened here, or so I thought. The third time it happened, I knew something was up. It was a coffee maker, a birthday gift to myself. I'd been tracking the package all day, and when I got the notification that it had been delivered, I rushed to the door. Nothing. I checked the bushes, the side of the house, even the backyard. Nothing. That's when I saw her, Karen. She was standing in her driveway, pretending to water her already soaked plants, but her eyes kept darting toward my porch. Karen was the self-appointed HOA enforcer, the kind of person who measured grass with a ruler and sent passive-aggressive notes about trash cans being left out too long. She'd always been nosy, but this was different. I decided to test my theory. I ordered a cheap pair of sunglasses online, something I wouldn't miss if they disappeared. Sure enough, the package went missing the day it was delivered. This time, I was ready. I had set up a small security camera near my front door, hidden in a potted plant. When I checked the footage, there she was, Karen, strolling up to my porch in broad daylight, glancing around like she owned the place, and snatching the package like it was hers. My blood boiled. Who did she think she was? I confronted her the next day, casually mentioning that I'd noticed some packages had gone missing. She acted shocked, of course, clutching her pearls and saying how awful it was that someone would do such a thing. But I saw the flicker of guilt in her eyes. She knew I was onto her. I thought about calling the police, but what would they do? It was my word against hers, and Karen was the kind of person who could charm her way out of anything. No, I needed a different approach, something that would teach her a lesson she wouldn't forget. That's when the idea hit me. My uncle had been complaining about a skunk problem on his farm, and he'd mentioned trapping a few to relocate them. I gave him a call, and after explaining the situation, he agreed to lend me one, just for a day or two. Be careful, he warned. Skunks are unpredictable. I assured him I would be. This wasn't just about getting my packages back. It was about sending a message. Karen thought she could get away with stealing from me, but she was about to learn that actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences smell really, really bad. Revenge is best served smelly. That's what I kept telling myself as I drove to my uncle's farm to pick up the skunk. The plan was simple. Create a decoy package, let Karen steal it, and let nature take its course. My uncle had already trapped the skunk in a secure, ventilated crate, and he handed it over with a mix of amusement and concern. "You sure about this?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. I nodded. Karen had crossed a line, and I wasn't about to let her get away with it. Back at home, I got to work on the decoy package. I found an old Amazon box in the recycling bin and filled it with crumpled newspaper to give it some weight. I cut a few small air holes in the sides, careful not to make them too obvious, and placed the skunk inside. It was surprisingly calm, probably because my uncle had fed it before I left. I sealed the box with packing tape and wrote "fragile" and this side up on the sides, just to make it look more legitimate. Then I placed it on my porch, right in the spot where my other packages had gone missing. The next step was the hardest, waiting. I had to make sure Karen saw the box and took the bait. I knew her routine by now. She always took her dog for a walk around 10 a.m., and she never missed an opportunity to snoop around my yard. Sure enough, right on schedule, I saw her coming down the sidewalk, her yappy little dog leading the way. I pretended to be busy in the front yard, trimming bushes that didn't need trimming, just to make sure she noticed the box. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her slow down as she passed my porch. She glanced at the box, then at me, then back at the box. I could almost see the gears turning in her head. I went inside and watched through the window as Karen lingered near my driveway, pretending to check her phone. After a few minutes, she casually strolled up to my porch, looked around to make sure no one was watching, and grabbed the box. I had to stifle a laugh as she hurried back to her house, the box tucked under her arm like a prized possession. She didn't even try to hide it. The arrogance of it all was almost impressive. Now came the fun part. I knew it wouldn't take long for the skunk to make its presence known. Skunks don't like being confined, and they definitely don't like being manhandled by nosy neighbors. I waited, my phone in hand, ready to capture the moment. About 20 minutes later, I heard it, a blood-curdling scream, followed by a series of curses that would make a sailor blush. I rushed to my window just in time to see Karen running out of her house, waving her arms like a maniac. The skunk waddled out behind her, looking thoroughly unimpressed. The smell hit me even from across the street, a pungent, eye-watering stench that made me gag. It was glorious. Karen was furious. She stood in her driveway, screaming about sabotage and animal cruelty, but I couldn't stop laughing. The look on her face was priceless, a mix of rage, humiliation, and sheer disbelief. Her pristine white blouse was now stained with skunk spray, and her hair was a mess. Even her dog was keeping its distance, barking at her from the safety of the porch. I knew I'd probably pay for this later. Karen wasn't the type to let things go, but in that moment, it was worth it. She'd stolen from me one too many times, and now she'd learned the hard way that you don't mess with someone who's willing to fight back, with a little help from Mother Nature. The next morning, the neighborhood was in chaos. The skunk incident had spread like wildfire, and everyone was talking about it. Karen's house reeked. The smell had seeped into every corner, and even from across the street, it was unbearable. She'd spent the entire night trying to clean up, but skunk spray isn't something you can just wash away with soap and water. She tried every home remedy she could find online, tomato juice, vinegar, baking soda, but nothing worked. The stench lingered, a constant reminder of her humiliation. Karen wasn't about to take this lying down. She called an emergency HOA meeting, demanding that the board investigate the vandalism and harassment she'd endured. I knew it was only a matter of time before she pointed the finger at me, so I decided to get ahead of it. I printed out screenshots from my security camera footage, clear evidence of Karen stealing my packages, and prepared my defense. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about exposing her for the entitled thief she was. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, and it was packed. Everyone wanted to see how this would play out. Karen arrived wearing sunglasses and a scarf wrapped around her face, presumably to hide the lingering smell. She stormed to the front of the room and launched into a dramatic speech about how she'd been attacked and how someone in the neighborhood was trying to terrorize her. She didn't mention me by name, but she kept glancing in my direction, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. When it was my turn to speak, I stayed calm. I explained that I'd been dealing with package theft for weeks and had set up a security camera to catch the culprit. Then I dropped the bombshell. I handed the printed screenshots to the HOA board and asked them to pass them around. The room fell silent as everyone realized what they were looking at. Karen, clear as day, stealing my packages. The murmurs started almost immediately, and Karen's face turned bright red. "This is fake!" she shouted, but no one was buying it. The evidence was too damning. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unsure how to handle the situation. Karen tried to deflect, accusing me of planting the skunk as a vicious attack, but I pointed out that she wouldn't have been in that situation if she hadn't stolen my package in the first place. The room erupted into arguments, with some neighbors siding with Karen and others calling for her to be held accountable. In the end, the board voted to remove Karen from her position as HOA enforcer. It was a unanimous decision, and the look on her face was priceless. She stormed out of the clubhouse, muttering about how she'd get even. But no one paid her much attention. The damage was done. Her reputation was in tatters, and the skunk smell was just the cherry on top of her humiliation. As for me, I was hailed as a hero, well, by most of the neighbors. A few thought I'd gone too far with the skunk, but most agreed that Karen had it coming. The best part? My packages stopped going missing. It seemed Karen had learned her lesson, and the rest of the neighborhood had gotten a clear message. Don't mess with me. The skunk, meanwhile, was safely returned to my uncle's farm, where it could live out its days in peace, far away from nosy neighbors and porch pirates. Sometimes the best way to deal with entitled people is to give them a taste of their own medicine, with a side of stink. The showdown at the HOA meeting was the talk of the neighborhood for days. Karen's dramatic exit and the revelation of her package theft had left everyone buzzing. But I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to go down without a fight, and I could feel her plotting her next move. Sure enough, a few days later, I received a letter from the HOA. Karen had filed a formal complaint against me, accusing me of animal cruelty, harassment, and creating a public nuisance. She was demanding that I be fined and even threatened legal action. I couldn't believe her audacity. She'd been caught red-handed stealing from me, and now she was trying to turn herself into the victim. I wasn't about to let her win. I called the HOA president and requested another meeting to address Karen's complaint. This time, I came prepared with more than just security footage. I had receipts, delivery confirmations, and even a statement from my uncle about the skunk's temporary relocation. I also reached out to a few neighbors who had quietly confided in me about their own run-ins with Karen. Turns out, I wasn't the only one she'd been stealing from. One neighbor had lost a pair of headphones, and another had a package of baby clothes go missing. Karen had been running a one-woman porch piracy operation, and it was time to expose her for good. The second meeting was even more tense than the first. Karen showed up with a lawyer in tow, a slick-looking guy in a suit who kept throwing around words like defamation and emotional distress. I stayed calm, presenting my evidence piece by piece. The security footage, the receipts, the neighbor testimonies, it all painted a clear picture of Karen's entitlement and deceit. When I played the video of her stealing my packages, her lawyer actually winced. Even he couldn't spin that. Karen tried to argue that the skunk incident was disproportionate and dangerous, but I pointed out that she wouldn't have been sprayed if she hadn't stolen the box in the first place. "You brought this on yourself," I said, looking her straight in the eye. The room was silent, and for the first time, Karen looked genuinely shaken. She'd spent so long bullying people and getting away with it that she didn't know how to handle being held accountable. The HOA board deliberated for what felt like an eternity, but the outcome was worth the wait. They dismissed Karen's complaint and issued her a formal warning for her behavior. They also announced that they would be implementing new security measures, including neighborhood-wide surveillance cameras to prevent future package thefts. It was a victory, not just for me, but for the entire neighborhood. Karen's reign of terror was officially over. As the meeting adjourned, Karen shot me a look that could have melted steel. "This isn't over," she hissed, but I just smiled. "It is for you," I replied. She stormed out, her lawyer trailing behind her, and the room erupted into applause. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The skunk had done its job, and justice had been served. Karen had learned the hard way that you don't mess with someone who's willing to fight back, no matter how unconventional the methods. The aftermath of the HOA showdown was nothing short of satisfying. Karen's humiliation was the talk of the neighborhood for weeks, and the lingering skunk smell at her house became a running joke. People would walk by and pretend to gag, laughing as they hurried past. Karen, who had once been the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, was now a pariah. She stopped attending HOA meetings, and her daily patrols of the streets came to an abrupt end. It was clear she couldn't face the shame or the constant reminders of her downfall. A month after the incident, Karen put her house up for sale. The for sale sign went up overnight, and within days she was packing her things. Rumor had it she was moving to a different town, one where no one knew about her package stealing ways or her unfortunate encounter with a skunk. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction as I watched the moving truck pull away. The neighborhood felt lighter, freer, without her constant meddling and judgmental glares. The new HOA president, a friendly retiree named Linda, was a breath of fresh air. She actually listened to people's concerns and focused on making the neighborhood a better place rather than nitpicking about grass length or trash cans. Under her leadership, the new security cameras were installed and package theft became a thing of the past. Linda even organized a community barbecue to celebrate the changes, and for the first time in years, it felt like the neighborhood was coming together as a community. As for me, I became something of a local legend. People would stop me on the street to thank me for standing up to Karen or to share their own stories of her pettiness. The Skunk incident had become a cautionary tale, a reminder that no one is above the rules, not even the HOA enforcer. My packages arrived safely from then on, and I no longer had to worry about Karen's nosy eyes watching my every move. The Skunk, meanwhile, was living its best life back on my uncle's farm. My uncle had named it Stinker and joked that it had become the farm's unofficial mascot. I visited a few weeks after the incident, and Stinker seemed perfectly content, waddling around the fields and occasionally spraying the occasional curious raccoon. It was a happy ending for everyone involved, except Karen, of course. Looking back, I realized the whole ordeal had taught me an important lesson. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire, or in this case, skunk spray with skunk spray. Karen had thought she could bully her way through life, taking what she wanted without consequences. But she'd underestimated me, and that was her biggest mistake. I wasn't just fighting for my packages. I was fighting for fairness, for accountability, and for the idea that no one should be able to get away with treating others like they don't matter. The neighborhood was better off without Karen, and I was better off for having stood up to her. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my peace of mind and showing that even the smallest acts of entitlement can have big consequences. And if that meant using a skunk to make my point, so be it. Sometimes, the best way to deal with entitled people is to give them a taste of their own medicine with a side of stink.